guys, it's Katie. Welcome back to my channel. I wasn't intending to wear this jacket for this video, but I'm so cold. So I'm really excited about today's video. I've actually been meaning to do it for a little while now, and I want to make this clear because this is not to be confused with a video that I plan to be posting a little bit in the future. Today I'm going to be talking about some books that I feel like perfectly sum up my reading taste. Like, this is me in a book. This is what I look for in a book. These are the elements that I absolutely love, but they're not necessarily my favorite books. That's going to be a different video. I want to make an updated like all-time favorite books video, but these ones, I'm trying to find a good way to describe the way that I'm kind of separating them in my head. It's more like I'm picking these books apart. And these are the elements. This is the vibe. This is sort of my range of tastes because they're different genres and stuff. So if you're new to my channel, I think this will be a really helpful video so you can kind of get a taste for what kind of books I like and if we have similar taste in books. Or if you're old here, I would be curious if these are the books that you expected me to say based on what you've kind of considered to be my reading taste from watching my videos in the past. I 100% got this idea from a tweet that I responded to back in August. I'll put it on the screen. Chandler tweeted, if you had to pick 5 books that best represented your taste in books, what would they be? And my response, I put 5 books. Those 5 books will be in this video, but I expanded on that. So now I have 11 books to show you today. I just think it's an interesting concept to think about, not what are your favorite books, but what books are a good representation of your taste in books, because it is a different question. Anyway, I would love it if you guys would leave down below in the comments what you think your 5 books that represent your taste in books would be. I'll have all of the books that I talk about today linked down below in the description if you want to go check them out. Even though these aren't my favorite books, I still obviously love them and would totally recommend them. But other than that, let's just get straight into the video. I think I'm gonna start with the 5 that I listed on Chandler's tweet, and then we'll get into the ones that I since added onto the pile. So the first one, this one is an all-time favorite book. A lot of these cross into both of the lists, but it's The Female of the Species by Mindy McGinnis. I read this probably 3 years ago. When did this come out? It came out in 2016. I feel like I read it pretty close to there. But this is a young adult contemporary following our main character, Alice. Her sister was essentially raped and killed, and Alex took her revenge on her sister's rapist by murdering him. And we're following a couple of different point of view characters, and as you can see, I have annotated this book probably more than any other book I've ever read. I have a full book talk, like a spoilery book talk that I did when I was like a sophomore in college, so I'll link that up in a card if you want to see that. I've read this book several times. I actually took an adaptation class when I was a junior in college, and I had to write a script adaptation of a book, and so I wrote a script for this book for that class. I love this book so freaking much. This is a good like well-rounded one. This is everything I love in a book. I love how it was written. I thought the characters were so morally gray and intriguing. I love the important messages in this book and the conversations that it starts about slut shaming, rape culture. I actually don't like hard-hitting contemporaries. It's just not a genre I tend to gravitate towards, and so I really like that this one didn't read like that. It felt like that discussion was interwoven into a much bigger story, and it wasn't really the focus, but it was very clear. I read this in like 2 days. I couldn't put it down. If you haven't read this book yet, I know it's a hit or miss with people, but I highly recommend this one. And now on the totally opposite end of the spectrum, a very different genre, we have Night Film by Marisha Pessl. This is an adult psychological thriller. This is also one of my all-time favorite books. And this book, we're following Scott, who is a journalist whose reputation has kind of been ruined by this occult horror film director. And so now, to try and save his reputation, this journalist is looking into the supposed suicide of that director's daughter. I feel like this book sums up my reading taste. 1, because I love psychological thrillers. 2, because I love horror and horror movies and stuff. So the whole like underground horror community vibe of this book was very fascinating to me. I love mysteries. I love multimedia books that have like web pages and stuff in them. I love any books that have like a spooky vibe where you don't know if this book is going to be totally realistic or if there's going to be a paranormal element that comes into play, and you're sort of walking that line of, I don't really know what's real. I don't really know what's happening. I love intricate and multi-layered books. This book is kind of slow-paced and it kind of meanders around a little bit because you're just exploring all of these little like corners and all of these little trails, and it's just so complex. I just love everything about this book. Talking about it makes me want to reread it. And I just found this so convincing. Like, I was convinced that Cordova, the director in this book, is a real person. Like, he's so fully fleshed out, and this whole following he has and all of these groups on the dark web, like everything just seemed like so convincing. I'm like, yeah, this is totally a thing. This is happening right now. Like, I believe it. Jumping to our next book, another totally different genre. We have Heartless by Marissa Meyer. This is a YA retelling of Alice in Wonderland. I feel like this one speaks to a totally different side of my reading tastes. This is actually an origin story for the Queen of Hearts, who is the villain in Alice in Wonderland. And I love this because I love Alice in Wonderland. It's one of my favorite stories. I love the whole vibe of that story with, you know, like the playing cards and the Queen of Hearts, how magical and whimsical and just completely imaginative Alice in Wonderland is. I love that fantasy. But then I'm also fascinated by villains and what makes villains villains, and our main character in here, I loved her so much, and you're just watching these things happen to her and she's like slowly descending into the villain that we know her as today. And I just find that like fall from grace for characters, obviously it just like really humanizes the villain, and I find that very fascinating. But I swear I always end up liking characters who end up being villains more than I like characters who end up being heroes, because you sympathize with them more, because something truly horrible had to have happened to them to push them to that extent. And so I just feel like these books make me feel so much more. There's also a really cute romance in here, and I'm always a sucker for that. Basically, this book did everything right for me. This is like my soul in a book. Loved it. If you haven't read it, highly recommend. I feel like you would all be surprised if I didn't talk about this next book in this video, and that is The Unbecoming of Mara Dyer by Michelle Hodkin. This has been one of my all-time favorites since I was like 16 years old. This is a YA sort of paranormal romance, I guess. Our main character Mara was in this accident with all of her best friends, and she was the only survivor. So now she's moved to a new town, she's suffering from PTSD, and she's having these hallucinations, so we don't really know if she's just suffering from PTSD or if these sort of supernatural weird things are actually happening to her. And so the reason why I loved this is I love well executed, unreliable narrators. I'm a sucker for it. I love not knowing what's really happening or if it's just in the main character's head. I loved the romance in here, which is another good one, but I really like stories that are rooted in reality, that just have like a little bit of a paranormal, supernatural, magical, dark twist to them. Like, it's mostly set in our world, but there's just like a hint of something else going on. That is the perfect line to walk for me. I still like fantasy and things like that, but my favorite are always books that are set in our world and feel like they could really happen today. There's just a little something weird happening in them as well. I also really like Michelle Hodkin's writing style. It's very short and snappy and to the point. I think it's very pleasant to read, but I'm someone who hates description. I hate writing it. I hate reading it. And it's not that there's not description in here, it's just clearly not like overindulgent, like just get to the point. It's got great dialogue in here, it's very witty, and I never felt like I was getting bogged down in unnecessary description. So that's totally like a personal preference kind of thing, but this is the kind of writing style that I am all about. Next I have The Raven Boys by Maggie Stiefvater. This is the first book in a young adult fantasy, urban fantasy kind of series. This is another one kind of similar to The Unbecoming of Mara Dyer, where it's set in the real world, but we have a hint of magic in there. So in this book we're following Blue Sargent, and she's from this family of psychics, and she gets caught up in this group of boys who go to a private school known as the Raven Boys, and each of the characters kind of has something weird going on with them. Their group basically starts hunting for this Welsh king, and the myth says if you wake him, he will grant you a favor. I love this for how unique it is. Like, this is so freaking weird, and I feel like that's why it just like did not work for a lot of people, but I love the writing style in here. I love the depth to these characters. I find them all so interesting. Like, I hate spin-offs. Like, I'm the first person to tell you I hate spin-offs, but I would read a book following each one of these characters because I found them all so interesting. I really enjoy Maggie Stiefvater's writing. It's very different from the last one I was talking about. I feel like hers is more like beautiful and has a little more description to it, but I still really enjoy it. And this is a series that I just got lost in. Like, I couldn't stop reading it. I binge read all of the books that were out, and it was just something that was so different from everything that I'd been reading at the time. It just felt like a breath of fresh air. Like, I'm not super familiar with mythology outside of, you know, the stereotypical like Greek myths and things that you're taught in school. So whenever I read a book that focuses on mythology that I've never heard about, that I don't know anything about, I love learning about that in like a fictional setting like this. It's also cool because this is happening in Virginia, kind of near where I went to college. But I just found this series to be very complex and intricate as well. And after reading the full thing, I kind of want to go back and reread the series and see if I can pick out the things that I missed the first time around, and I love when series do that. You don't even realize the first time you're reading how smart and how carefully laid out it was until you finish the whole thing. Okay, this video is getting long and we're only through the first 5, but those were the first 5 that I originally like tweeted about. Now we're gonna move on to the books that I have since tacked on to this list. So next we have Verity by Colleen Hoover. I've talked about this book a lot this year, so I will keep this brief, but this is a new adult psychological thriller. I love this because I feel like I desperately want more new adult books. I feel like everyone who's my age has been saying that, how there's a severe lack in the publishing industry for people my age. Like, we have young adult and we have adult, and there's nothing for people in their 20s. So whenever I find a book that's not just a romance with people my age in it, I get really excited, especially because thriller is like one of my favorite genres. So seeing new adult thrillers, I'm all about that. This book is about a writer who's taking on a ghostwriting position for a famous author to finish off a series. And so in order to do so, she goes to that famous author's house to look through her office to try and find some notes, outlines, that kind of thing, to see where she was going with these last couple of books. And she's staying with this famous author's family while she's doing her research. And while she's there, she finds an autobiography in that author's office. It's never been published, no one else has ever seen it, and she starts to learn some really disturbing things about this family while she's living with them kind of in the middle of nowhere. I love this because I love thrillers, obviously, but I really love a good plot twist. I love an ending that just destroys me and changes everything. Like, the entire book was disrupted by this ending. It just changed literally everything. And I think it's hard to land that. It's hard to properly build up to an ending enough where it doesn't feel like it just came out of nowhere and it doesn't make sense, but also building up to it just enough that it's still like a complete blindsiding experience when you get to it. And I just thought she landed this ending so well. I didn't see it coming at all. It doesn't feel cliche, like I haven't seen it before like this. This book, I read this I think in like February of this year, and I'm still recommending it in like every other video on this channel. Please read it. I loved it so much. The next book I feel like really properly represents this side of my taste of reading, and that is Vampire Academy by Rochelle Mead. I love trashy, fast, paranormal romances. I either want like a super complex, intricate book like Night Film, or I want something that feels like I'm watching a reality TV show and I can read in a day like Vampire Academy. I love Vampire Academy. It's fast and it's fun. The romances are cute. They're compulsively readable. I binge read this entire series. I'm currently rereading it right now, and it's just so much fun. I'm not gonna give you an explanation of what Vampire Academy is about because it's been out for like 12 years by now. I think everyone knows, and I've been talking about it in a lot of videos lately. But whenever I say I want something trashy and fast and fun to read, this is the kind of book that I'm talking about. And I just love vampire books. Next I have The Cruel Prince by Holly Black. This is a YA fantasy that's about a human girl who grows up in the fairy world after a fairy murders her parents and kidnaps her and her sisters to go live in fairy with him. And I say this one is a good representation of my reading taste because it's a very simple fantasy, which is definitely a particular taste. Like, I've heard that be a major criticism of this book, but personally high fantasy isn't really my thing anymore. I'll still read it from time to time, and I definitely used to like it more when I was younger, but now I don't like the really high fantasy worlds. And this is kind of like a fantasy that reads more like a contemporary. Like, it's very easy to read if you don't like fantasy. It's very fast and easy to get into. It's not super complicated. And personally, that's just the kind of fantasy that I like to read now. I also really like the romance in here. I will never get over like the angsty kind of toxic and twisted romances. Like, this is obviously not a good example of what you should be striving for in your own romantic relationships, but there's a lot of like sexual tension and angst, and it has like a slow build to it, and it's just very satisfying to watch play out. Okay, we're down to our last three. Next I have Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. I feel like this is a perfect representation of what I look for in nonfiction. Big Magic is about creative living, and Elizabeth Gilbert is obviously a writer, so this is about her being a writer and what she thinks about creativity and where ideas come from and how to be a creative person and pursue creative jobs without fear. And I just found this book super motivating and inspiring, and I really connected with a lot of what she had to say about this because I'm also a writer. This is something that I reread every single year because I just love it so much, and it makes me feel so good and like fired up and ready to take on my next creative project every time I read it. Within last year or this year is when I really started to get into nonfiction, but this is 100% my kind of thing. I've kind of dipped my toes a little bit into like the self-help and personal development, and I've disliked more books than I've liked, but this is enough of like a tilt to it that I really liked it. This just like hit the nail on the head for me. Next I have Girls with Sharp Sticks by Suzanne Young. I just read this one this year. and I absolutely loved this book. This is sort of back to like the YA dystopia trend. This follows a girl who goes to this private school kind of in the middle of nowhere that's very secretive, and no one on the outside really knows what they do there. The school is for all girls, and they're basically teaching them how to be proper young women, like a finishing school, like manners and that kind of thing, but it's more set in the future. And there's something weird going on at this school that we don't really know what's happening. It was described as a mix between Westworld and Handmaid's Tale, and I love both of those things. That's what originally drew me to this book. And kind of similar to The Female of the Species, I feel like this has really important messages in here, but it's not like hitting you in the face with it. And it's in more of like a dystopian setting, so it's not like the contemporary hard-hitting genre, which just isn't my thing. I don't know, whenever it has like a little bit of a twist and it's in a different genre than contemporary, I feel like I'm more susceptible to those kind of messages and stuff. But this was another one that was compulsively readable. I think I read this in 24 hours, and I know there's a sequel coming out, and I'm really excited about that. And this is another one that has just like the slightest mystery pulling you through it that just kept you so on the edge of your seat and so intrigued that I couldn't stop reading it. And I love, like, I don't seek out books that are actually just straight up mysteries, but I love books that have just a little bit of a mystery that it's like a carrot that's like being pulled in front of you and you're like, I have to keep reading, I have to figure out what is going on here. And then the last book that I'm going to be talking about in this video is Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. And this is a perfect example of why I say this video is for books that describe my taste in books but not my favorite books, because this isn't a favorite book of mine. I think I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. If anything, I'm using this book as an example because of the potential here. This is an adult dark urban fantasy set at Yale, and our main character is in the Ninth House Society, which basically keeps the other 8 societies at this college in check. And these other 8 societies are like performing rituals and practicing in different kinds of dark magic, essentially. And the reason why I think this is a good representation of my taste in books is because I love any kind of dark book. I don't know why, I'm just like drawn to the darker themes and things like that. And this is another one that's set in reality, but we have all of these tiny little paranormal twists. Like we have ghosts in here and these weird rituals that are supposed to help these societies with like a little bit of dark magic. We have like demons and like portals and just all of these tiny little paranormal elements that are hidden in the real world that most people don't know about. And I just found this world to be so well developed and complex and interesting, which is why I talked about this in the wrap up the month I read this, how I feel like this book has so much potential just because of how interesting this world is. So I'm going to continue reading the rest of the series in hopes that she builds on this foundation in a more satisfying way, if that makes sense. But yeah, those are all the books that I'm going to be talking about today. Let me know down in the comments what books you think are a perfect representation of the type of books that you like to read, or let me know if any of these were a surprise for you, or if there's like a book that comes to mind for you, for me, like a book that you associate with me. I would be interested to know. But thank you guys so much for watching. If you're new here, I would love it if you would subscribe. I put up at least 2 new videos every single week. If you like this video, I'd appreciate it if you would give it a thumbs up because it helps out my channel a lot. And all of my links are down below in the description if you want to come follow me on Instagram, check out my freelance services, pick up a copy of my book, check out my second YouTube channel, all of that good stuff. But I think I'll just see you guys in my next video very, very soon. Bye.
So hit me. So hit me. So hit me. First a confession. With you, I feel a connection. With